and welcome. Today, we're diving into an important and often misunderstood dynamic in the modern workplace, generational diversity. Both Barb and I have received inquiries and also requests for training about generational diversity. And that's why we thought we should have a podcast to discuss this very interesting topic. So, for the first time in history, we have 5 generations working side by side. We have the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Generation Z. Each generation brings its own values, work ethic, and communication style. And with these differences, there will be challenges such as misunderstandings, stereotypes, assumptions, and even conflict. So in this episode, we're going to explore what really shapes a generation, how those influences show up at work, and what we can do to bridge the gap. We're going to unpack some research. We're going to share some real world cases and offer some practical strategies for creating a workplace where every generation feels seen, heard, and valued. So whether you are leading a multi-generational team, you're experiencing some frustration, or you're just trying to understand your coworkers a little better, this conversation is for you. My name is Cecilia Young.
And I'm Barbara Clifford.
Barb, I know that you have recently received an inquiry from a client regarding a training, and I believe you've been designing it and you're about to run it. So I'd like to ask you, through your research and accessing the materials that you have designed so far, what do you define as the 5 generations that are in the workplace right now?
What's really interesting about that definition is that there's two ways, there's lots of theory, lots of research, but there's kind of two ways that people define or academics define those generations. It's either rigid years, but I think more importantly and more interestingly is what's happening in a particular time, what is creating influence in that era that impacts on the culture and the mindset of that generation as they move through life, as they enter the workforce, move into positions of leadership, and close out their life, as they become parents or grandparents, all of those things. And even the age that people having children changes generationally. So there's two kind of demographics. And so when we talk about baby boomers, that name in itself says so much about that era in time. Straight after the war, World War II, people were, and during World War, is that life was so precious that people celebrated it, and that they've been detached for so long, they come together and whee, yay! So there's this massive surge in population and wanting to connect to family life and culture that it generated a whole generation. Baby boomers. There was this boom and explosion in the population. My mum's a baby boomer and she talks about that era. And then there's us, that's Gen X, before the onset of the dot-com generation that they call it. Millennials were having the pick up and born into that era of the dot-com era, whereas we were before it. It was like before there was flight and after there was flight in terms of aviation. So I think that's more interesting rather than the years that people were born, is actually looking at
Sure.
what things happened to that generation at that point in time that kind of defined their generational personality, as a way of describing that.
Sure, sure. And, as someone who has been quite involved with DEI initiatives, and I've delivered training on generational differences, for me, a very simple definition is just it explains the era in which a person was born affects the development of their view of the world.
Yes.
And there are some commonalities. If you were born in a certain time, that you would have experienced world events at the same time. And because our value systems are shaped in the first decade or so of our lives by our families, our friends, our communities, and the significant events that are happening. So that does matter, the time that you were born. And so that's the actual definition of generational theory. It's just defined by age boundaries and the similar experiences you had growing up.
Can you imagine? You just made me think, and people talked about it, is those kids that didn't get to go to school or preschool or primary school during COVID, right? And
Yes.
how that's
Yes.
impacted upon the way that they engage socially. And so quite often a lot of these landmarks are trauma. If you think
Yes.
about Vietnam War, World War II, those kind of things, it's the depression. They were traumatic experiences that for a lot of people, it was quite global. For a lot of countries, they were impacted. I want to ask you
Hmm.
the question, Cecilia. We always talk about, you often bring this up with me, is to say, careful. Let's not stereotype. Let's not pigeonhole people. Let's not make gross assumptions. And when we talk about the workplace and relationships and leadership, what are the risks around that? Why is that dangerous? And why do we always need to be mindful of that in terms of the relationships we have?
Yeah. Be very careful because we just assume that, let's say Gen Z or Gen Alpha, because they're born with technology, that they're all addicted to technology. That's not the case. That's a huge assumption. And then that baby boomers are all hardworking, or
Yeah.
they only prefer phone calls or emails. That's not the case. So we want to be careful around stereotyping someone because of their age.
Yes. And I was just looking, I know that this has come up in I was just trying to find some research that was done. This was done around the Australian Human Rights Commission, that around those assumptions and those risks. So, for example, with the research, it showed that people would not be employed or would be excluded from things because of those assumptions. So, for example, with an older generation, oh, they're not going to understand the technology and they're not going to be engaged in it. They're not going to be interested in it. So, we're not even going to approach them or ask them to be involved in this project, to learn this thing, to participate in the conversations. I think TikTok is a great example of that. It's a new frontier of social media. It's rare that something picks up a following like Facebook did, but TikTok is that new frontier. And it started out as a young generation thing, and everybody still has this stigma that it's people dancing, right? And yeah, there is a lot of people
Mhm.
dancing on there, but it's the assumption that it's a young people's platform. But my age group is actively
Yes.
taking it up and
Yes.
engaged in it. And there's an assumption that my generation, grey hair in the 50s, is not on TikTok. But I tell you, I'm addicted to this stuff and I'm on it more than I am on Facebook. And so is the rest of my family. That's where
I've seen a lot of influencers in our age
yeah,
group who are doing
yeah,
very well on TikTok. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, here's an assumption. Let me give you let me backpedal a little bit. So in my training, I show these magazine covers, and these magazine covers say, me generation. This generation is entitled, and the typical things that you would say about a generation. Do not want to work, entitled, only focus on self and not willing to work, whatever these buzzwords are. When I show the actual magazine titles, and I can show you in a visual, it's like from 1960. There's another one
Yes.
that's from 1980. And then a more recent one was from 2014. It was on the cover of Time magazine saying the exact same thing. Millennials, they are entitled, they are lazy. And this is the same label that we're hearing. And I don't want to add any more fuel to it, but these are the terms that are describing Gen Z right now. And so it seems like this just gets passed on generation to generation. Let me give you a scenario. So someone in their 20s joins an organization as more like a first time job, a very entry level. And after discovering that there are no promotions after a year of service, like you need to work in this job for at least a year before you're considered for a promotion. This young person said, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not going to wait a year. I deserve to be promoted now because I am doing such an amazing job. I am exceeding expectations. I deserve a promotion after 6 months on the job. Do you think this is something that managers are talking about today, or this is something they're experiencing today?
Yes, yes. And again, I'm going to make an assumption, but again, this is a generational thing, right? And however, in saying that, that's a belief that that generation might have because of their experiences. So it's not that you poo-poo it or discredit, that you come to that with empathy and understanding and education around what are the options to work around that. Every generation has to adapt to another one and be have that emotional intelligence and that empathy to be able to adapt and shift. And that's where we become really, really powerful. So what we know from the millennial and particularly the Gen Z generation is how instantaneous and quick everything is and how
Mhm.
familiar and that how much that is in the world, right? And so the beauty in that, and we're going to no doubt we'll talk about the pluses and the minuses. The beauty in that is no limitations, innovation, get things done now. Let's not wait. Let's act on this. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. Right? That's what you
Yeah.
want, right? In a workforce, not like, oh yeah, put together a proposal and we'll take it to a committee and then we'll get it done. You want to go, let's make it happen. Um, the backfire to that is, oh, if it can't happen now, it's not worth doing. So we've got to find the
Yes,
sweet spot between those
I
two things.
know. How do you communicate this though? Like when you are applying for a job, when you are entering the workforce, you can't have this expectation that you'll be promoted within a year. And the data, we did our research. So interviewing Gen Z or Gen Z graduates and entry level workers say that they expect to be promoted within 18 months. That's
Wow.
the data. Like 80% of them expect to be promoted within 18 months. Now, that's I think it's Deloitte. That was the Deloitte report and several other research reports. But I actually went out and I spoke to a number of managers, my 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 network out there, and asked them, and they agreed completely that this is the kind of response that they are receiving. Now, in my scenario, the case that I just gave you, what do you tell this person?
Do you know what? I think who are we to rain on anybody's parade? Who are we to say, you know what? Go for it. That is a big goal, but let's look at what it would take for you to get promoted in 6 months. If that's what you want and if that's what you're expecting, let's go for it. Like,
Right,
so if you're going
right.
to be promoted, then this is what's going to need to happen for you to get there. It's
I
not
just
just
find it interesting. Where did this expectation come from?
I think I don't know. I can only speculate, but I do believe there is also this narrative that exists through social media, particularly with the influencers, is that overnight success narrative and how quickly people create fortune, popularity, celebrity with instantaneously, with
Yes.
little resource but lots of passion and enthusiasm. So perhaps it's got something to do with that. And interestingly, when you talk about different generations in terms of followers and people that set a cultural precedent, what existed probably 15 to 20 years ago, there was celebrities, there was superstars, there was one person that everybody knew. But now it's these little micro. chasms where people are a celebrity in their own fishbowl. Like
Mhm.
I remember hearing someone saying how there was hordes of people following this person down the street because they were a celebrity on TikTok in one stream, one algorithm, and a whole heap of other people were going, "Who's that?"
Mm.
Whereas back in the 20s in Hollywood, everybody knew that actress, everybody knew that business person, that socialite or whoever, because there was these one stream of narrative. But in TikTok, you'll see people say, "How did I get on this side of TikTok?" Like you end up in a stream of people that all have a common interest and celebrities in that stream, which I just find
I have
so
to
interesting.
admit, that is something I'm not very familiar with, TikTok. So I'm going to probably get in touch with a young person and
That's
figure
a
out how to get on
stereotype. I'm
TikTok.
on TikTok.
It's not a stereotype. I'm saying that it's not something that I have ventured in, but I'm very open. I'd like to know more because I have seen your videos and I've seen other influencers in our age group and I've seen it being done very well. So I'm very open. I hear what you're saying because through my research, I also read that there is this fascination with getting very successful, becoming very successful, achieving very high levels of success without having to put in the work or put in the years of work, expecting that there are instantaneous results. I also read in that same article that it's an illusion at a certain level that there, again, this is a stereotype. Because if you were to poll 100 Gen Zs, Gen Zers, they would say this is not what they see. They actually feel pessimistic.
Yes. And there's a lot that, and what the dilemma too is that there's people not wanting to move into those leadership positions. They're wanting
Yes,
the autonomy, they want their own success in some ways, which I find really, really interesting. And what also comes through in terms of themes in each generation is work ethic and what that looks like. And when you say every generation thinks the other generation is lazy, it's because they have a different focus or prioritization around how they work or do things, or achieve things, or get things done, and what they prioritize. I had a massive debate, like it was almost, you know how in families they say, don't talk about the war, or don't talk about religion. In my family, it's don't talk about the Thermomix, because my mum has grown up in
the
a generation.
Thermomix.
Wait, there's a story here. So, my mum grew up in a generation where it was the hard slog, like you did things from scratch, you cooked from
Mhm.
scratch, you made your own clothes, all of those things. My sister and I, so I'm born in the 70s, my sister's born in the 80s. So we are a different generation, but we're working women. We are really, really hardworking women in our family. So the Thermomix is something, it's like, great, we can have healthy food, but it's done quickly and easily and we don't have to think about it. Mum wants to stand over the pot, stir it, taste it, the science, the alchemy, the creativity of it. And we're going, but wouldn't you love the Thermomix where you can just plop it in, press a button,
Right.
and it's created a great Burmese sauce or something? And she gets infuriated by it and doesn't see the value of how that can enhance what she loves about cooking and food preparation, which is her big value. Her food's
Sure.
her soul. She's constantly filling my freezer full of healthy, nutritious foods that that yeah, that's what she values. And so the Thermomix to her is evil.
Right, right. Okay. I get it. I get it. Whereas your sister is probably millennial, Gen X, kind of like that Gen Y, and
Mm.
millennials and Gen Z would be DoorDash.
Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's it.
So, but not everyone in that generation.
Yeah.
Again, that there are the preferences because you didn't have DoorDash growing up.
Yeah. And what I find really interesting is how the previous generation influences the evolution of the next. So, for
Mm,
example, when I think about my mum, and again, the baby boomers, and you think about women in the workforce, they had to fight for equal rights for women. Like if you think about the Melanie Griffith, Sigourney Weaver, that the working girl, that was an epitome of the 80s movie about women having the right to succeed and that it's not an exclusive right. The whole shoulder pads, like I just think about the shoulder
mm.
pads of the
Yes,
80s.
yes. Remember
And
9 to 5, Dolly Parton and
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. And
Jane
Dynasty
Fonda?
and
Yes,
all of those
yes,
movies. So those women fought and paved the way for us to have the rights that we deserve. And Dolly Parton and the sexual harassment stuff in that movie, right? However, my generation was only entering into that space of the rights that had been paved before. So
yes.
I still didn't have, and I say in workplace training, I've been bullied, I've been sexually assaulted in the workplace, I've experienced all of those things, and people are shocked. And it's because there wasn't the awareness and the understanding as we were coming into that workforce. The next generation now, we've done the fight. We're like, hang on a minute. These right, this is the law and these rights exist. And hang on. And so that's what our generation has done. And also helicoptered in for our kids or the next generation go, you speak up for yourself. You stand up. You go and do that. We've all worked hard for you. So the millennials and the Gen Z are going, that's not my right. No, 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 you're bullying me. No, no. And it's almost gone in the other extreme in terms of demanding all of these rights rather than having to, like, I've learned the hard way. Hang on a minute, that's not okay to touch me like that. It's
Yeah,
happened.
I'm
I've
so
lived with
sorry you
it.
went through that, Barb. I truly am. I hope that those perpetrators were held accountable for their actions.
Oh,
Really, truly.
there's no, they weren't. None of them were. However, this is the interesting thing. That's not right and it's not okay. But I am such a strong, and I know you're the same, and a lot of our generation is. We are strong, we are resilient, and we've robust because we've learned the hard way that that's not okay. We know what that feels like, so we're not going to let it happen again. And we've got really good measures in place to be able to set strong boundaries, but that's because we've been through that trauma. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I wouldn't want that for anybody else, but like for
No.
example, with my son was going through some really difficult things, and I so it's like because I deeply love and care for him, want to step in and fix it for him. And I actually had a conversation and he got it. I said, the only reason I know how to do this is because I've had to do it myself. You've got to do this. I can't
Mm.
step in for you and fix it. You've got to fix it yourself. These are the avenues, these are the decisions you've got to think about, but you've got to go through this pain yourself to resolve this problem with all of those now legislations and resources that are in place. Go use them, but I'm not going to step in and do it for you. You have to go through it. Yeah.
Thank goodness that based on what we experienced and what we had to endure, the workplace is safer and is progressing in the right direction, but not everywhere. I mean, there's still a lot of room for improvement.
What people often don't stop and reflect on, and this is getting really, really dark now, but what the data shows us is that there's so many suicides that stem from horrible experiences in the workplace or humiliations or bullying or trauma that happens in the workplace. The World Health Organization in 2019 recognized that burnout was from work. People experiencing stress burnout it's a workplace hazard. So that's why all these things do exist, are in place to be able to mitigate all of those. But it's each generation that has learnt these things and where big activism has occurred in the workplace. Like if you go back, 120 or 30 years, there was children climbing up chimneys to clean the chimney sweeps, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
child labor. And it was just, oh, yeah. Can I share with you something? We had a really interesting conversation about values and generational values, which influence the
Mhm.
workplace. When you think about um, how we treat women in the workplace and a whole range of things of what's acceptable and not acceptable. When I was growing up in my early 20s, I was very encompassed in the gay and lesbian community. And there was my mum, my mother, and my grandmother. And in my grandmother's era, homosexuality was completely closeted, right? But
Mhm.
she was embracing of it. She wanted to learn, she wanted to understand it, she wanted to accept it. And I'd have all these gay friends over and they're very flamboyant and my grandmother would turn to my mum and she'd go, and is he a homosexual? And mum would go, I don't know. Would you like me to ask? I'll go and oh no, 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 right? And but it wasn't from a judgmental point of view. It was curious. She was curious and wanted to understand and accept and embrace. Then with my mum's generation, we had this conversation. Mum's coming to terms with fluid gender identity. And she's like, we were laughing and going, oh my God, you're just like grandma. Because she go, do I call them she, he, they, them? Or, you know, for some people that are in our world that are gender fluid. And I'm, you know, trying to come to terms with it and laughing and saying, oh, you're just like your previous generation. So my sister and I said, what is it going to be for us when we're the oldies? Are we going to go, are you AI by AI? Are you part AI and part human? Are you AI diverse? Or what's going to be
Sure,
confrontational?
sure. What would be the terms then? The key here is to approach it with curiosity. How do we suspend judgment and compare it to our generation? Well, in my
Yeah,
generation, no, it has
yeah.
to be, please educate me. Please share with me. I want to know. I want to ask. I want to ask questions because I want to know more. I need to be educated. I think that's the key instead of assuming. So I won't name them, but I have heard people say, "Oh, I don't understand all this." And about this younger generation. But that's exactly the phrasing that would provoke. Well, how about asking a question? I don't understand this, or how they could be XYZ. Then that is a perfect point to ask a question. To ask a question that's without judgment and is genuinely curious. Because
Yes.
as soon as there's this statement, I don't get this, I don't understand this generation, then you're closing off a dialogue. You're closing off the possibility of having an engaging conversation. I want to ask you what you think happened to this young person who wanted the promotion.
I don't know. I'm curious to know, actually.
Yeah, so I will tell you, this young person was actually me in my 20s. When I
Wow.
reflected back on that, because I'm seeing all these comments about being expecting a promotion, expecting to be highly paid, I went, wait a minute, I was like this in my 20s. I
Wow.
was emboldened. I thought I was the bee's knees. I thought I was the best thing to happen to this organization. Why are they not recognizing my efforts, my contributions today? And this was in 1993.
Wow, you've just blown me away with that. And what it just hits
Yes.
home for me is what we talk about is the risk of assumption. And that is the impetus for a lot of conflicts that I see in mediation, right? Is that assumption and then how that creates conflict. So we talked about it in terms of thinking someone's too old or this generation is too lazy. I'm not going to ask them to do that because they're too lazy. I'm not going to ask them that because of that technology. And immediately when you're telling that story, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's a Gen Z. And you're asking me my opinions and I'm giving you my assumptions based on that generationally. And you're going, well, you know, that was me 20 years ago.
Very interesting, right?
Mm.
So I'm going to include this in an upcoming training
Mm,
and
yes,
ask the participants what they think how they would approach it.
yes.
And
And
I
I
think that would be a real wake-up call as to how we automatically assume that it is a young person today entering the workforce.
I think some of those quotes, right? I would love to do a collation of quotes like that where people are criticizing the generation before them for being lazy and then going, which generation is saying, do you think is saying that? Because that would be
Yes,
really challenging, right?
yes,
Um,
yes.
because that it is something that you
I
see.
have this. I have, there are some that they're magazine covers, and I'll pull some of this. Some of them are giveaways because they say it's the TV generation. All they want to do is watch TV all
Yeah,
day. But you could replace TV with screens. It's the same thing. But I can
yeah.
pull these and send them over to you.
I,
I want to share something interesting, a little fun. And through all this research, I'm having a lot of fun actually, and broadening my research points. So I've been watching this show called Battle of the Generations. It's a Canadian show. I don't think it's available
we've got something
outside
similar in
of,
Australia. I can't say I've watched it, but I think I've seen
okay.
ads for it. Yeah.
Okay. It's just a game show
Yeah.
where there's a representative of each generation. I've watched a few episodes because I was just curious. And they put so much emphasis on pop culture of each generation. And it's kind of fun because
Mm.
you play along and you see it, whether you would actually win or not. And consistently, I think I watched 3 or 4 episodes. The millennials and the boomers, they are eliminated. It's usually the did I say millennials? I said Gen Z. Gen Z and boomers are eliminated. It's a battle between really the ones who get through all the way to the end. It's either millennial or Gen X.
Why do you think that is? Why is
Yeah,
that?
so I'm opening it up to you. I'm going to ask you, why do you think that is? So they're all pop culture questions, like movies, toys, a lot of references to things like you would know from that generation. A lot about entertainment,
Mm.
artists, pop culture.
Mm. Wow. Do you know, I think about each generation, if you think about generations prior to ours, in terms of popular culture, you can really pinpoint it. Like you can really pinpoint 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But once we start going 90s right up to now, it's really hard to define trends in musical fashion. I think for me, it's a bit of a blur
Mm,
between each of those
mm.
generations. However, I will say that watching when we talk about popular culture and things that define a generation, Friends is one of those things that's had the series Friends has had a big resurgence
Yes,
recently, and people love revisiting it. I loved it when that was around in the 90s because I was a
in the
similar,
90s. Yes,
yeah, because I
yes.
was a similar
They're all the
age
same age as us,
as
Barb.
us, right? And I could
Yes,
relate to the stories, the situations, the clothes they were wearing. I tried to
yes.
style my hair like Jennifer Aniston and look at their makeup and their jewelry and all of that stuff. I can remember I was never a center part person, but put my hair in center part with the clips on the side because that's what Jennifer Aniston used to do, right? And
I blame that show for my lack of eyebrows. So yes.
yeah. However, and we put on a production of Full Monty in community theatre recently, and it was just so interesting when you watch Friends and the Full Monty, how dated it is in terms of
Mhm.
the jokes around body image, gender, sexuality. I watch Friends and I cringe and go, oh my gosh, that is so offensive.
Sure, sure.
I thought
Yes.
it was
But it's very
hilarious back at
popular.
the time,
Like you
right?
said, there's a resurgence. So younger generations are watching it now and really enjoying and finding it humorous.
Humorous as in laughing at us or laughing at the jokes.
No, just enjoying. So there's like a renaissance of a lot of these shows, and I'm surprised at the music that my nieces and nephews are interested in. They're from my generation, but they've been brought back with a modern twist.
Well, we can say the same thing about the 80s, right? I remember in the 80s being fixated on the 60s clothes, like going through op shops trying to find all the clothes and the hairstyles and the bit,
Yes.
and there was a resurgence in the 80s of old 60s songs and revamping them to make them more modern. So that's really interesting, right? Where that
Yeah.
previous generation influences. And like my family loves Back to the Future because my husband and I are Gen X, we so loved that film. We've kind of instilled that passion in our kids for that film. They love it as well. But what's really scary is that if that people talk about this in social media, if Back to the Future was made now, we would be going back to the 80s or
Mhm.
even the 90s, if we were going back in time. And for
No.
me, the 90s doesn't feel like that long ago. But then I think about it in terms of mobile telephones and internet and all of those things, how new all of that was. Just be getting
Yeah.
onto the internet was a new frontier and exhilarating.
Oh, I remember all that. Yes. We're very lucky, I feel. We bridged quite a new number of technological revolutions. And this was also addressed in the show. Now, I'm going back to why Gen Xers and millennials tend to win.
Yeah.
And this is totally just my analysis, and I'm very open to hearing what someone else would have to say. So, as a Gen Z, I mean, they're 20 plus years in life, right? Because the definition of a Gen Z is born between 1997 and 2006. I think that's those are the year parameters. So there is a limited exposure to the world,
Mm.
limited number of years on the planet that you cannot deny. Now, there are lots of access to knowledge, information, entertainment, but one can only consume so much on a given day. However, if you look at millennials, if you look at Gen Xers, they have many, many, many more years. And in my case, 3 times the amount of knowledge that's stored. If I am an open person and I'm interested in what the millennials are listening to, what the current trends are, I could win this game. Because not only do I know from current trends, I also know from my own generation, and I also know from the previous generation. So it just comes down to I just have more knowledge. I have more years on the planet. And that's the case for millennials. But I did see on one show, the millennial was out first round just because they were so limited in knowing the other generation's information or
Why does the
trends.
baby boomer get knocked out then?
Baby boomer, they have the opportunity, and I saw a couple, I was really rooting for them, but they will get stumped with a number of trivia that only millennials or Gen Z would be interested in. There were a few of these questions where I just had no idea what to answer.
Yeah.
Certain movies, certain rap stars, or trends that did not completely go viral. It's just something that's talked about in that age group. So it's too far on both ends. You
Yeah.
really have to spend all day like really interested in researching the other generations to know.
I saw
I
a
thought this was such an interesting question. So there was one question was, who is the actress? This was a question asked of the Gen Z. Who is the actress that played the lead role in Cleopatra? Okay, so you probably know the answer to this, and I know. And her answer was, "Well, I don't know any." And this movie was in 1937. I believe that's the year. 19 is in the 30s. Very old movie. And this Gen Z said, "Well, I don't know any old actresses, so I'm just gonna say the only one I know is Audrey Hepburn. So that's my guess." And not correct. The correct answer is Elizabeth Taylor. And you know what the Gen Z said?
Who's that?
I have no idea who that is.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So that hit me like, of course, that name means nothing to this generation. And I get that a lot. Like, who's that? I don't know. And
Yeah.
there's, if I may say, from the direct experiences I've had, there is no interest either to learn more. And that's a personal experience. I'm not making an assumption. This is from young people that I talk to. It's just, yeah, so what? And I'm not interested. Because a
Mm.
follow-up question would have been good. Like, who is that actually? Can you tell me?
Although, if you think about it, like I think, I don't know if I think about when I was that age, I probably wouldn't have been interested in actors that were big in the 40s. Like my grandma and grandfather would probably, I mean, I loved Fred Astaire and I loved Judy Garland because they were on the movies that were on TV when there was nothing else to watch. So I just sit there and watch them. Uh, but isn't that interesting too? Like in some generations are forced through experiences, whether it's television, music, the arts, or whether it's workplace experiences, and whether you enjoyed it or not, you had to endure it because that's what your generation had to do. Whereas a Gen Z generation probably has a lot more choice around a whole range of things, what they watch, when they watch it, what jobs they're going to do. Whereas, like, for example, my mum's generation, when she went into the workforce, you were a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. You choose. That was
Mhm.
it. It was rare that women got to choose careers beyond that.
Right.
And the expectation that you would get married and stop working. And mum, as it went into teaching, and when she got married, it was like, well, you can stop teaching now. Yeah, that's it. You stop now. So, and those choices were made for you. Whereas what's really interesting is that the Gen Z has so much choice. And
Mhm.
I wonder too if that's overwhelming.
It is based on the research. So, shall
Yeah.
we talk about some practical strategies? What can we
Yeah.
do to reduce those assumptions and stereotypes? And what are some practical some behaviors that would help mitigate boxing people into a generation?
Mm.
Now, I'm going to start first with saying that Lumina has another application to help people understand generational diversity. Like, surprise, surprise, Lumina is another tool that we can use in a situation like this. Lumina allows a team to see their differences and their similarities through the lens
Mm.
of personality and not generational. So you and I could have very similar, let's say we're of a different generation, but we can see that, wow, we have these similarities and we have these differences. And where do these differences come from? So Lumina Research has an indicator, but is it's just a bit of information that you could that could generate a discussion. There tends to be more introverted qualities when it comes to Gen Z. And there tends to be more discipline driven behaviors for baby boomers. But again, this is just a sampling, and we could talk about that. Can you imagine? We can have an open discussion. It's
Mm.
partly due to my generation, but it's also part of my personality. And I could
Mm.
discuss, where did this come from? I learned this when I first started out in the workplace. Or I'm introverted because I had to work remotely for the first 3 years of my career. I didn't even get to meet a single person in the office until year 3. So, of course, you're used to working on your own and without daily interaction, physical interaction. So,
Mm.
these are some of the things that could really open up a conversation using a personality or psychometric assessment lens. That's one way.
Mm. And you just made me think about the whole nature nurture argument. How much is something personality driven? How much is something generationally driven, right? How much is something culturally driven? What are those things that drive certain behaviors? And again, the risk there is assumption, is we assume that the reason you want to do this is because of your culture. And you go, no, actually, no, it's just my personality. Or vice
Yes.
versa.
Well, there's the cultural diversity as well, because
Mm,
the culture that we come from have different preferences. So, but again, that's another stereotype.
Yeah, yeah, right. Right.
So we cannot assume that, and we could bring that in and share that. It's up to me to share. Oh, I feel it's partly due to this, and there are so many sources of why I'm compelled to prefer this particular behavior.
Mm. And I think, what we know, you and I know through that personality and behavioral profiling is there's no right and there's no wrong. There's just strengths or overuse or overextension of those different styles based on different circumstances. And so we think
Yes.
everybody else is nuts and we're the ones that have got it right. We want everybody else to change, but we don't want to change ourselves. So we have to understand that people have a different flavor or a different way of viewing challenges or situations that could be because of influences in that generation that influence the way that people process information or tackle problems or
Mhm.
engage with others. I mean, the classic one, right, with probably Gen Y and Gen Z is a preference to communicate through text and email and those methodologies rather than speaking. And even our generation has become more familiar with that in terms of having difficult conversations over email rather than just picking up the phone and talking to somebody.
Mhm.
We've become so reliant and complacent with that. And it's become habitual, but it's all you could also define that as a generational thing, right? Oh, this generation, they only want to talk through text. Um, but it's habits that are formed through things that are available to us in our environment.
It tends to get classified as a generational preference, but it's not.
No.
And there we do get stuck in our stereotypes. And I was talking to you about agile transformation, and one of the agile principles, this is created by software developers. One of their principles is face-to-face communication is the most effective.
Mm.
That gets priority over a phone call, video chat, and definitely over text. Face to
Yeah.
face communication is the most effective. I mean, that's not generational. It's
Yeah.
for an industry that is known for technology and wanting to avoid face to face communication. So we have to be really careful with our assumptions and stereotyping.
I would suggest if we think about like going back to what are the strategies, right? And if we've got
Yes.
to be broad here because there are so many different generations now in the workplace. My approach and my philosophy would be how do we support you to be courageous? How do we support you to step out of what's familiar to embrace and learn about a different perspective and way of doing something? As long as the goals are aligned in terms of what we are attempting to achieve, how we achieve it, you need to sit with the discomfort of going, they're taking a different path to get to the same destination. The challenge, I guess, is determining. I could see what could be a challenge with different generations about what is most important in terms of the sub goals that you might have in achieving a big outcome, and that might come into conflict in terms of different generations. I'm just thinking on my feet here in relation to that. However, it's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and embracing a different way of doing things. I just go back to my dad on the farm, right? Farming is an ancient industry that's been handed down in my family for 4 to 5 generations in terms of how you farm the land. Some things don't change, but then the equipment changes, the demands of produce, what's trendy at any particular time, and what we grow. My dad has had to embrace using a mobile phone for emergencies or to contact people rather than the two-way radio. No one's going to be on the radio anymore if you're calling for help if a tractor's rolled on top of you. You have to be on the mobile phone. And so he's had to embrace that. Yet, I laughed. I took a photo of my dad. It was my auntie that noticed it. I didn't even notice it. I think I shared with you. My dad's farming boots with a little strap on the back of the boot to help you pull them on. Dad had pulled these boots on so many times that the strap had broken. So he just punched a hole in his boot, put a little zip tie in it, and created his own little strap to pull his boots on. And he was just so accustomed to it when he was going out somewhere, we're going to a family gathering, he just pulled on his boots, and lo and behold, there's that little zip tie. But that's a farmer's way of fixing a fence, fixing a gate, and I just thought that was so interesting in terms of beautiful innovation that he's brought through his generation to, fix something. And also, his mother, who grew up in the Depression, would not throw out anything. You fixed it, you sewed it, you darned the hole, you made clothes out of those flour bags. You did not throw out anything. You fixed it. You found a way to fix it. So, my father's had to embrace the mobile phone technology into an old industry, but there's a lot that an innovative technical industry can embrace by what he's done and what he does to solve problems as well.
Mm. Yes, yes. It's actually quite incredulous how technological advancements have affected farming and to a large degree not in a good way, meaning a lot of farmers are not able to sustain their businesses, but technology is incredible what it's done to advance modern farming.
Also, fishing. You know what's really interesting? We're going totally off topic here, but fishing, right? Like in fishing, the fishermen, fisher people, we say now, right? Um, they had a sense of the weather, the seasons, the tides, to know where on the ocean was a good spot to fish and at what time, where the sun was landing. Now people have radar technology. They don't even have to use that kind of connection to the earth and the instinct to find things, which has put a demand has really eaten away at the natural ecosystem of the earth and us all living in harmony because the people are farming these fishing from these supplies and diminishing supplies because they have that technology.
Mm. Mhm.
So yeah, so coming back to the solutions, Cecilia, what
Yes.
do you think? I mean, I've given my ideas, but what are your solutions to navigate some of these challenging situations? And I want to talk to you too about creating a fence. How different generations get so offended in the workplace by other generations by what they say or what they expect. What are some
Oh, that's
solutions
a
you
good
can
one.
recommend?
So I have something around getting offended. And this was directly from a valuable resource who shared with me an example of of someone from the younger generation and the manager having a conversation. So the person in the younger generation was changing career paths and just one day just said, okay, I don't like this path. I want to go another path. And the manager asked, well, have you read the employee handbook around changing career paths? And the younger person immediately was offended and said, you are making an assumption that I am not able to read and that there is something about policy issue that I have not addressed. So the response was because it was a closed question, it was a yes or no. And that gave the younger person in that younger generation to say, I'm offended by your question.
Mm.
So this is a real case scenario. So what to do? The suggestion is to instead ask open questions and do not ask closed questions because this manager thought they were trying to have a conversation. Do you know what the policy says? And really, why do you think you can just go into this direction? I think that was the real question, but it was phrased in a much more supportive way, or so they thought. In fact, the open question would sound like okay, so what are the reasons behind this change in career path? And what do you think would be required to take on a new career path? So just having those discussions instead of turning it to policy or any type of limitation.
Mm. And I guess
So that
I mean,
was,
I'm thinking too as an open-ended question, and it's such an interesting point that you said, don't ask a closed question, because that's a yes or no. Yes, no, yes, I've done it. No, I haven't. An open-ended question could be, what research have you done around what's needed to do that? Like
yes.
what do you know so far about that? What resource can I support you with in that research process? And I don't know that I would think to do that in the moment, but just going open question, not closed one, which is explorative, not interrogating
That would be
somebody.
helpful because
Yeah.
you might be presented with a situation exactly like that. And instead of just jumping ahead thinking you are the older, wiser, and the experienced
Mm.
manager in putting a stop to this, instead, practice curiosity, ask some open questions.
And so I think what I'm envisaging in with this is expansive questioning rather than narrowed based on your own experiences, right? That's what we want is to expand, like you said about that game show. We've got to really expand our knowledge around something. So how do we ask questions that expand? And going back to that saying or that affirmation, what do you believe to be true that isn't? What assumptions? What are you believing that this is the way to do something, that they must have done this, that they must think like this? What is it that we don't know?
Here's another example. So this is from another generation. It says that will come to you and say, I'm so frustrated with the system. This is not working. This is not how we would have done it. This change is not effective. It's actually taking more time than required. It's complicating things, which is actually really simple.
Mm.
So what would be an approach to a comment or a statement like that?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I would think um, something's complicating something that is simple. Uh, I would do the explorative conversation is what would happen if we did do this? What would it tell us? It's always if we travel this path, what could the journey look like down that? What if we tried this and see what it taught us? There's always opportunity. If we don't try, we won't know. So until we try something, we won't know what that looks like. It could seem like a long way in the short term, but could it take us to an even bigger, brighter destination, the Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz? If we take
Well,
this
this was
different
a
path.
real situation when there was
Mm,
resistance towards adding an additional measure, which digitized and saved the data.
right.
Whereas this person just did things a certain way and it was manual. And of course, that's extra work and it's complicated. So it's through exploration that, oh, they are actually uncomfortable with the system. They're uncomfortable with the data. They're not seeing the value. And they're coming at the technology with this frustration and resistance already. So they're not going to be as open. So, how about asking some questions, exploring? So, what have you tried? Okay, what support do you need? And what do you think would make it more efficient? What are some of your suggestions? We should go back to the old way. Okay, well, we could consider that. But what are some other ways we could make this easier or more efficient?
Well, and the other thing too is it goes back to when you talk about it from the terms of bracing into technology and change management, right? When it comes to that, it's always the what's in it for me. Why do I want to go through the pain of having to learn something and do something different when I'm so comfortable and familiar and it works? Like it
Yeah.
works. Why do I need
Yes.
to change over to that when I'm really comfortable? It's what's in it for me to go through the pain of having to shift over to this laneway, this path. Um, why would I want to do it? And I think that's a really interesting exploration and that motivational interviewing to get someone to shift behavior and habits to explore and try something new. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we explored this in our last masterclass around giving tough feedback and
Mm.
how to be assertive when you are giving feedback that might not be easy to receive or to hear. How do you do that with kindness and with candor and to really help that person grow? So they might just be, they actually needed to hear, we have to, we're going to go through this whether you like it or not. Now I can support you, and let's, what's the harm in trying out for 90 days? We can have another discussion.
You make me think of a conversation, a saying that our mutual colleague, Michael Massey, he says when he deals with, having to deal with teams, he's a bit more brutal, bit radical candor, right? And he uses the analogy, he says, there's a train coming, like change is coming. So you have some choices. You can get on the train. It's going to be difficult to jump on. It's moving fast, but you got to jump on and come along on the journey. You don't have to. You can jump off, you can go, you can leave if you want, if you don't want to come along for the ride. If you try and stand in front of the train, it's going to be painful. It's you if you try and stop the train that's coming, it's going to hurt and you're going to get run
Yeah.
over. So they're your
Yes.
options.
But also in our training in how to give feedback and how to give that kind of feedback that is tough, but it's so necessary. You could also add, and I can totally picture Michael saying that. There's another piece, which is, you know what? You're not going to be alone. I will be right there with you. You're
Yeah.
not going to have to go through this alone. It's tough on the train, but I'll be right beside you. And if at any time you want to get off, I can also help you with that. But I do know that you have the potential to be on the train. I
Mm.
see it in you. Not only do you have the potential to be on the train, but you could really travel and go far.
And I
Let's
think
focus on that.
something that came up, I mentioned before the podcast, I was involved with a really interesting and invigorating community meeting and how to instill change within that community. And a lot of that is about generational change and a whole community changing. And something that came up is that I love that saying from Gandhi, like be the change you want to see in the world. You be the early adopter, you be the person that embraces that technology. What if you could take some things on? And I admire my mum as much as she won't take on the Thermomix, right? How much she will embrace new ways of things and exploring even in her late 70s still wants to learn something and find out how to use something and make those things work for her because she sees other people benefiting from it. And I think it's because others have adopted it, it influences her to adopt that as well. Cecilia, you were talking about this person that you've met that's influenced you, who's working well into their twilight years. And there's an element that I think for me, certainly, I go, wow, if they can do it, I can do that. What does it take to do that? How do I change? And so we can be a generation rather than getting stuck in our stereotypes, regardless of what generation you are, is approach things differently and step out of that comfortable stream that you're in, that your cohort is in, that you can go, wow, I could learn something from a baby boomer, or a baby boomer can go, wow, I can learn something from my grandkids on how to use this mobile telephone.
Mhm. Oh, yes. So there's actually a wealth of innovation, ideas, efficiency, possibilities, knowledge from all generations.
Mm.
We as leaders, and whatever, regardless of whatever role you're in, it's up to you to be open and to ask, to see someone from that perspective instead of the limitations. of how you view them based on generation or their role, whatever it may be.
I did, and I know we probably need to close out soon, Cecilia. I did a talk on a cruise ship around generations, and it attracted a lot of people coming to listen and to learn and to understand. And my son was sitting in the audience, and he would be the Gen Y, Gen Z generation, right? I was talking about millennials and I was talking about the millennial problem in terms of millennials moving into leaderships, and the way that I phrased it was that they were a problem. And my son really picked up on it, and he goes, because I said to him, "What did you think?" And he goes, "You talk about us like we're a problem to
Mm.
solve." And really made me think in terms of the moving forward with the training that I do. I'm now going to speak about the problems that millennials face in moving into the workforce. Again, you're being a gross assumption, but for other generations to understand what they need if they're their leaders, what they need from them or what they can expect, and what older generations need to do to support that succession of that leadership coming in, right? So rather than me going, no, they're the problem, going, what are the problems that they are facing as they
Mm.
have to shift and embrace things?
Yes. And this is going to continue. In fact, I am reading up a lot more on our age group and just how much more time we will be spending in the workplace. It's going to definitely be beyond the 65 retirement age because we're younger, we're okay, I want to be careful about using the word younger. We're very different today at our age than the previous generation in terms of our lifestyle, in terms of our mobility, and just our ability to work. Because we're not working laborious jobs that required a lot of physical endurance. We're a generation of knowledge workers now that I would say have another 20 years based on that example you gave about the person that I was admiring, who's who's still very active at age 69. What
Yeah,
does
they're
that
not.
mean for the workplace?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does
This is
that
why
mean?
we have five generations in the workplace now, right? Because
Yes.
people
Yes.
do want to keep working and sustaining. Again, doing my research is where somebody was forced into early retirement and they actually sued their employer. They did not want to retire, but they wanted them to retire because I think they were 68 or 69. I'm like, no, I don't want to retire. My father-in-law is 82 and still working. Like he's not working a full-time job, but
Yeah.
he's still a consultant. He's still traveling and he's paid on board roles and things like that. So he's still working. He's still working. And I
That's
think
fantastic.
so he does that because it gives him joy. It keeps his brain active and he's really fit as well, physically fit. So he's able to do the travel and do those things. He's slowed down, obviously, but still, that's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. Yes.
Uh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up this episode, and we'll talk more next time. I know we started the conversation around menopause in the workplace.
That's going to be the next. So if you're listening to this one, stay tuned for the next one.